Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by and welcome to Visual BI's webinar. Today, we will be discussing about data governance in a cloud BI world where we provide Visual BI insights and perspectives in the area of data governance and special considerations to take into account when approaching cloud-based solutions. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit it via the Q&A portion of the screen. Simply type your question into the box and click Send. Our presenter will address questions at the end of the presentation, time permitting. If you don't hear an answer to your question today, don't worry. We will deliver answers to you individually after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and a link to the replay will be sent to you via email. Presenting today are Chandler Stevens and Clint Vallandigham. Chandler is a Vice President for Microsoft BI and Analytics at Visual BI Solutions and has more than 24 years of experience in the information technology industry and consulting. Clint is a Senior Manager of BI and Analytics at Visual BI Solutions and is an experienced information technology manager, supervisor, team lead, and individual contributor with expertise in the area of business intelligence and analytics using the Microsoft platform. I will now turn the presentation over to the presenters.
Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar, Data Governance in a Cloud BI World. My name is Chandler Stevens, Vice President of the Microsoft BI and Analytics practice at Visual BI.
Hi, I'm Clint Vallandigham. I'm a Senior Manager at Visual BI, also with Microsoft Services offerings.
Visual BI is an all-in-one partner for end-to-end BI and analytics needs. We have consulting services, software products, training, and analytics solutions. As you can see from the slide, we have a number of accreditations. We are both an SAP partner and a Gold Microsoft partner. Visual BI has a wide range of clients spanning our software services and training, as indicated on the slide here. So today we're going to talk about a number of things around data governance, Clint, and I think it's important to kind of set the stage of really what we're looking to do in terms of how this impacts data quality, kind of looking at some of the issues around ensuring compliance with Azure, as well as establishing data integrity and accountability. We're going to talk a little bit about the Data Steward today as well, and also cover off on what a development lifecycle with Azure DevOps, how that's an important part of a governance program. We will have some time for questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions during the course of today's webinar, please post those in the IM window, and we will answer those at the end. So as I mentioned in the last slide, we wanted to set the stage and define what data governance is. And data governance really follows along three areas. There's a people component, a process component, and a technology component. And from a people perspective, we mentioned earlier this notion of a data steward, which does play a critical role in the success of any data governance program. Ownership and accountability is assigned and agreed upon prior to releasing information and analytics to the enterprise. From a process perspective, we see data governance requiring a well-defined process and a workflow where the data is stored or ingested and transformations are applied. Additions or modifications to the process go through a change control, and we'll talk more about that later in the webinar. Security is also a huge concern at every step of this process. And then, of course, last is technology. And of course, the technology must meet the standards that are defined in the data governance program. Technologies chosen should help with the implementation considerations, supporting those areas of security and availability. So now that we've defined what data governance is, I think it's also important that we talk about why it's important. And Clint, I think you've got some notions here that I think are important for our audience to understand.
Absolutely. All right. So we set the stage. That there could be many benefits to data governance, and so we want to cover a few of the core areas of data governance in this presentation. We've got 4 areas listed here. I think these are 4 of the main areas that can really apply to cloud BI. So first, we're going to talk about quality. So establishing data quality and maintaining that quality throughout the life cycle of data. It's going to be critical to the success of our data governance and our data services. Establishing compliance. So a good data governance practice can ensure that we're compliant, not only internally but externally. This is very important now with the advent of like GDPR and the penalties of not being in compliance. So very important, especially in Cloud BI. Next, data integrity. So data integrity, this is a combination of security and change control, and these things can help maintain integrity through the lifecycle of this data. And lastly, I want to talk about accountability. So Channel mentioned earlier about the data steward. So the data steward is going to play a critical role in accountability, making sure that when data does come into question, we know who to go to, and then that person has that ownership and has that accountability to provide feedback when it's necessary.
So my takeaway on this slide, Clint, is you mentioned the compliance element, the GDPR, and of course recognizing that we may have members of the webinar listening in right now that are living or working in the EU or doing business in the EU. So certainly GDPR is a big part of their focus. But I also would point out that I think in this global economy that we have today, I think these data protection regulations are important for all to understand. So even though you may not be, working or operating in the EU, I think as an organization, you still have to have some considerations for that GDPR focus.
Absolutely.
So I think also it's important to have the cloud considerations, Clint, and I think there's definitely some policies that have to be drafted and applied for some key areas.
Absolutely. So just a couple things. We mentioned earlier when we were talking about what is data governance, we talked about the technology. It's important to remember that your cloud solution really needs to comply with data governance and not vice versa. So just consider that as you're making a choice for your cloud provider. In this presentation, we're going to focus on Microsoft's Azure platform and show how it does comply. So just a handful of considerations that are very specific to Cloud BI and what we're calling the modern data warehouse. So the first thing to talk about is data lifecycle. So when I talk about data lifecycle and a Cloud BI world, I'm thinking about some of the new technologies that are in play now, like a data lake and this concept of loading all the data to the cloud and then transforming it. So you end up with a lot of data in the cloud, and it's important to not just leave that data out there, to draft a policy that says certain data needs to be looked at, maybe needs to be removed after a certain time period, and draft that from the beginning so that those controls can be built into your solution and not just an afterthought.
And I think this is important because, obviously cloud computing it provides a fantastic set of technologies and capabilities, but there's costs associated, cost in storage, cost in access, and so forth. So I think that's absolutely critical, I think, for a lifecycle policy to reflect the realities, the economic realities of cloud, and I think that's an important point.
Next, security. So, security's always been forefront in a data governance policy, but data tends to be in a lot of places in a cloud solution. So you may have, many types of resources available. I mentioned a data lake. You may still have a data warehouse, several databases. You may have an AI platform. All these things have copies of the data. So it's important to think about security at the data level and not just the individual level. It's really important at the data set level to think about security. Next, logging and metadata. So the resources you choose for your cloud platform, they can't be a black box. You can't just put the information in there and hope that things are working. You need feedback. It's important to know that your processes are loading data and get that level of assurance that things are running and they're successful. Metadata is also an important area to talk about too. When it comes to tracking where things came from, who's the owner, those types of considerations. And so lastly, transformation. So I've mentioned a couple times now about how many copies of the data there can be in this data that's moving. At every level of this, there's opportunities for the data to be transformed. It's important through that your data stewards and the individuals that have the ownership over the data understand that transformation and validate it and approve it.
So now what we'd like to do is really kind of take a click down into each of these pillars across the quality, compliance, integrity, and accountability. And of course, the first one that I think is really forefront for a lot of the conversations I've had around data governance is this quality pillar.
Absolutely. So let's dig into what can make up this data quality, and also with respect to Cloud BI. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is system of record. So I'm harping on this, but I'm talking about how the data is moving, and there's data lakes and lots of copies of the data and things going around. It's critical to establish system of record with that. So understanding where this data is coming from, where it's moving to, and making sure that you're using the correct system when you're looking at specific pieces of data. So that establishes that authoritative source. So if we follow that pattern, if our data sets have established that system of record, then the solution that we develop will adhere to that single source of truth. That's something that we've talked about in data warehousing for many, many years, is that these solutions need to represent a single source of truth. And that's really important when we start looking at self-service BI and analytics. So we're going to put the power of reporting and analytics in the end user's hands. They're going to have to make choices, and the data needs to be clear. Otherwise we're going to lose trust that the reports and that the analytics are correct if the end users can't tell that where the data is coming from and that it does represent the correct piece of information.
So trustworthiness obviously is a very big part of that part of this pillar, of the quality pillar.
Right. So the next big piece to think about in data quality is master data management. So I think of this as really a subset of data governance. These are critical items that really they have to be correct for the data to be correct for data quality. These elements tend to be some of your major concepts, like your company name, division, department, those type of things. You can't have several versions of that floating around in a reporting solution. It can throw off your reporting and analytics. So establishing that from the get-go, treating them as important, and then putting ownership on those. So this is, again, where the data stewards come in. The data stewards can take ownership of that, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's consistent throughout the solution. So when we think about master data management too, there's many software vendors out there that offer solutions for this. So that's an option if you're a large organization, and this is burdensome. It's probably worthwhile to look at a solution like that. Microsoft SQL Server offers a solution for master data services, so that is an option. But it doesn't have to be that complex. It may just be a matter of looking at your master data and understanding your system of record for that master data as well. So there's many ways to tackle this, but it's something that can't be overlooked, or it can drastically affect your data quality.
And then it looks like semantic modeling is another kind of important part of this quality conversation.
Absolutely. So I mentioned self-service BI and analytics earlier. Putting all this data into terms that the business understands is going to be critical for making the right decision. So building those models and making that available, and also it gives the place that the semantic model gives an area where the data steward can go in and validate that data, and making sure that it is correct, it is validated, and that helps lead to what I talked about earlier, was a single source of truth for reporting.
And it would look like that this particular pillar, I mean, there's a lot of really preliminary conversations that need to occur in the organization to really pull together the system of record, making sure it's a single source of truth, trustworthiness, obviously correctly selecting and making sure the MDM, the master data management solution, aligns with the requirements. Mm-hmm. And then, from a business perspective, the semantics really have to be clear and leverage the terminology.
Yes, absolutely.
So the next pillar is the compliance pillar, which I think garners a lot of attention in today's discussions around data governance. And we see it as kind of four areas in compliance. Access and security. Having cloud-based resources have really challenged the more traditional approach that access can be controlled behind a network firewall. As enterprise data moves outside of the corporate infrastructure, determining the identity of those users and assigning permissions needs to be addressed. Establishing identity should be the top security priority of any cloud resource. Microsoft provides Azure Active Directory, or sometimes called Azure AD, which directly integrates with a corporate Active Directory to provide that one identity for users, whether they're accessing on-premises resources or cloud-based resources. Management groups are another area to have in consideration, and managing access at cloud scale can be a very demanding task for any security team. Azure Governance offers a collection of concepts and services to assist with those efforts. Azure management groups also provide a security container to manage access. Management groups can be organized into hierarchies which allow access to be inherited by resources. And then policies and blueprints. Policies are important as Azure Policy is a service that Azure provides to create, assign, and manage these policies. The policies ensure resources are compliant with corporate standards as well as service level agreements. Azure policies empower a cloud security administrator to manage and monitor compliance at the cloud scale. There are many built-in policies that can be quickly enabled to monitor for the common cases. And of course, blueprints. Azure Governance offers the creation of a blueprint that can be used to package various components from Azure Governance, such as the management groups and policies. This blueprint can be dynamically applied to a new Azure subscription, ensuring compliance as new cloud-based resources are set up and made available. So I think the takeaway on this slide is that Microsoft has really invested and provided quite a bit of engineering around this compliance area and ensuring that customers can effectively, as long as they apply the policies and address those, customers can feel pretty comfortable in knowing that they've got the backing of Microsoft in terms of getting these compliance issues underway.
All right, so let's jump into our third pillar, which is data integrity. So a couple main areas I'd like to talk around about data integrity specific to Cloud BI is the service level agreements and data orchestration. So a service level agreement, or an SLA, it describes the commitment of availability and quality. In order to ensure the accuracy and consistency of the data, the cloud-based system must provide a certain level of service that supports our data integrity needs. So let's talk about Azure for a second. So Azure provides SLAs for each of the resources, and that's all in their online documentation. SLA details are typically in terms of percentage uptime and the count of failed operations, and this depends on the type of resource. Azure also provides a ratio of service credit based on not meeting those SLAs. So when you're designing your cloud-based data services solution, it is critical that the resources are available and reliable. Understanding the specific SLAs and the provider's accountability with these agreements, when these agreements are not met, sets a great foundation for a successful solution. So the next thing to talk about is data orchestration. So the cloud-based data services architecture can contain many resources, like I've talked about before, and all these resources require a copy of the data. The process of data orchestration implies that an automated process oversees the data movement task. Many times during this movement, the data is transformed to meet the needs of the business or meet reporting needs. It's critical for data integrity that these transformations are applied in a consistent and repeatable manner. So looking at Azure, Azure provides what it calls the data factory. This is a completely cloud-based data integration solution. The Azure Data Factory provides pipelines that create and manage the movement of the data, and they assign the transformations using tools like Data Lake Analytics or even Databricks when we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning. The pipeline process can be completely automated through the use of triggers and monitoring is available to ensure the desired outcome.
So the final pillar is accountability, and from our perspective, we have two areas of focus here: ownership and monitoring. From an ownership perspective, again, we've mentioned the role of the data steward. The data steward has a special responsibility for utilizing the data governance process to ensure that data is the highest quality. The data steward also assumes ownership for many aspects of the data. Examples of this include system of record assignments, data transformations, validation of the semantic model, as well as ensuring accuracy of the analytics of the data. Communication is also a core attribute of a successful data steward. The role serves as the trusted advisor between IT and the business users and can raise awareness and adoption of enterprise data initiatives. From a monitoring perspective, again, the data steward should have both a retroactive and a proactive responsibility around monitoring. Data movement and transformation processes such as the Azure Data Factory pipelines should report any failures to the data steward. This can be in the form of direct mail or the ability to access a monitoring interface. Microsoft Power BI could be used to consume and report on those types of activities and should provide a very clean and simple interface than working directly in Azure. Of course, you can work with Azure to monitor this as well, but some of those consoles get a little dense. As an owner of the data governance process, the data steward should also provide input and feedback on elements that can be improved or may not be working as expected. So again, this is one of those kind of important areas when establishing a data governance program. This role of the data steward has quite a bit of responsibilities in this space.
Absolutely. All right, so one of the last things that we'd like to discuss is the concept of development lifecycle. This was something that I mentioned earlier when we talked about just special considerations for Cloud BI. Agile software development. So agile development is used to describe interactive software development. And this is defined by development lifecycle delivered in smaller increments. These increments are called sprints. Cloud-based solutions can present challenges around deployment. With the shortened delivery schedule from these sprints, the need for integrated tools and an automated process are critical to ensure that the data governance process is maintained throughout deployments. A couple key elements that can be provided here. Let me mention, I wanted to introduce Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps provides many tools to support agile software development. We've got many of these tools listed here. It provides Azure boards, so this helps you work with your sprints and work with the work items that have been assigned to those sprints. A repo, this is your source control repository. The pipelines we've talked about earlier, where the data transformation and things like that take place. Having documented test plans, and then artifacts as well can be stored here. Three main takeaways to take away from what we can do with Azure DevOps is these three concepts of continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. So continuous integration, this takes advantage of, the CI components of DevOps take advantage of continuous integration to improve software development quality and speed. When you use Azure DevOps to build apps in the cloud and deploy to Azure, each time you commit code, it's automatically built and tested. So that's helpful. These things are happening automatically in DevOps for you. With continuous delivery, you ensure that the code and infrastructure are always produced in a production deployable state. So with continuous delivery, by combining continuous integration and infrastructure as code, you'll achieve identical deployments and the confidence that you need to manually deploy to production at any time. And then lastly, continuous deployment with continuous integration and continuous delivery. So continuous deployment, you can automate the entire process from code commitment to production if your continuous integration and continuous delivery tests are successful. So using these practices paired with monitoring tools, you'll be able to safely deliver features to your customers as soon as they're ready. So before we wrap up, we wanted to introduce this slide that depicts Azure's data service offerings as they pertain to a modern data warehouse and advanced analytics. This slide runs from left to right. So at the far left are your source systems, so like a line of business application, anything that you want to bring into the environment. Moving to the right, we ingest that data into the cloud solution. That ingested data is stored. We can then prepare and train that data. So this is where we may bring in artificial intelligence algorithms, machine learning, anything that can enhance that data. And finally, we're going to model and serve the data to the end user for analytics and reporting. So those are our main buckets. You can see here that there's several Azure resources that are identified with those buckets. So highlighting these 4 resources, all these resources, the Azure Data Lake, Databricks, Data Warehouse, and Analysis Services, all are going to need their own copy of the data to perform their function. This is what I've talked about before, that in a cloud environment, you're going to end up with several copies of the data, and each of these 4 could potentially create transformations on the data. So like we talked about, the data steward needs to have that ownership and responsibility to understand those transformations and validate and approve them at each phase of this solution. With all that data movement, we talked about data orchestration. So the Azure Data Factory is responsible for that. So the Data Factory is going to, in an automated fashion, facilitate that movement of data. The Data Factory also provides logging and those type of things that we talked about as well. And then finally, Azure's Active Directory. So we talked about security and maintaining the identity of the users accessing this solution. So this is where that fits in. It's one of those overarching technologies that acts on several of the resources that we're seeing here.
So some of the key takeaways from today's webinar are listed here on the slide. The first one, of course, is that hopefully we've properly explained that Cloud BI can present many data governance challenges over traditional on-premises solutions. We also focused around Azure, the capabilities that it brings to the table to help overcome those challenges. Data quality, compliance, integrity, and accountability can all be accomplished with a strong data governance program, and we've shared with you some of those concepts with the notion of having always a pre-built policies, having a plan, and importantly have a data steward, which plays a crucial role in the success of any data governance program. Addressing the areas we have covered so far may appear a bit daunting for some organizations who may have struggled with cloud data governance in the past. The good news is that Visual BI has a solution offering, and we're happy to introduce it on this webinar. The offering is called BI Vantage, and it is our offering that focuses on building out modern data warehouse capabilities in Azure. It's an offering that focuses on establishing a foundation for delivering data analytics to key decision makers. We've built the offering to provide a low TCO solution, coupled with that quick and iterative implementation window that follows the DevOps model that we shared earlier. It allows the organization to right-size the implementation to address business requirements. And it also comes in a pay-as-you-go scalable solution, of course, via courtesy of Azure, that grows with your needs, with the needs of your business over time. And last but not least, it allows, it helps us bring together Visual BI's data warehousing experience, coupled with the fantastic engineering that Microsoft has put into their Azure data platform.
So with that, we'd like to open it up for questions. As mentioned at the beginning of the call, we will be providing this webinar and the content later on. So if for some reason there is a question that we're not able to answer today, we'll certainly follow up accordingly along with the links. I want to thank Clint for joining today's discussion, reviewing the Cloud BI governance issues. And we hope that you found this presentation useful. If you'd like to follow up on any specific topics of this presentation, certainly you can contact us at solutions@visualbi.com, and we'd be happy to talk with you about your own governance journey and governance process in the Cloud BI space. And I want to thank everyone, all the attendees for joining. We really appreciate your attention. Have a great day, great evening, and we'll talk again soon.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.